Hello, NDE family. Whenever I remember I sold out my Christian parents for a bounty of just $1,000, tears will always fall out of my face. But Jesus still found me in the same darkness I helped create. I didn't find him in a church, or through a preacher, or in some holy vision at first. I found him in guilt, in the quiet nights when I couldn't close my eyes without seeing my mother's face, or hearing my stepfather's last words. You may judge me if you consider that I caused the death of my parents for just $1,000. But in North Korea, it could feed a family for months by loyalty, or even decide who lived and who died. That's how cheap I sold my soul. That's how far I fell. And this is where my story begins. My name is Miran, and I was born 26 years ago in a small apartment on the edge of Hamhung, one of the coldest industrial cities in North Korea. Our building stood near the gray chimneys of a fertilizer plant where the smoke never stopped rising. My mother worked in a canteen that fed the workers, and my stepfather, Gene, was a mechanic. Life in Hamhung was simple on the surface. We woke early, joined morning gatherings, sang songs praising the leaders, and lined up for rations that were never enough. From childhood, I learned to repeat what everyone said, that our country was pure, that our leader was the sun, and that there was no greater honor than serving him. But even then, something in my home felt different. There were whispers after dark, and my mother's eyes always carried a quiet kind of fear. When I was 7, I noticed my mother and Jean whispering at night with the windows closed and the radio turned up loud. I thought they were talking about work, but one evening I woke to a soft sound. It was not conversation. It was singing, low, trembling, but peaceful. The words were not from any revolutionary song I knew. When I peeked through the crack of the door, I saw a small book in Jin's hand. The pages looked old, brown at the edges, with strange markings on them. My mother's hands were clasped together, and tears ran down her cheeks. I froze, confused. We were told only traitors cried like that. I remember running back to my bed, heart pounding, not sure if I had seen something wrong or holy. By morning, the apartment looked the same, but I could feel an invisible line drawn inside our home, something sacred and dangerous. As I grew older, I began to understand more about what that small book was. It was a Bible, a forbidden thing in our country, something that could send a family to prison or worse. At school, our teachers showed us posters of men and women being punished for spreading foreign lies. We were told that Christians were spies from America who poisoned people's minds with fairy tales. The teacher would shout, "If you ever hear someone praying or see a strange book, report them to your district officer." The whole class would shout. Yes, I shouted too. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be loyal. But every time, I thought of my mother's face in the candlelight, her lips moving silently, her eyes closed as if speaking to someone unseen. Fear filled me. I was torn between two worlds I did not understand. My mother and Jean never spoke openly about their faith, but I noticed how they lived. When a neighbor was sick, they would secretly bring her food. When ration cards were short, they shared half of what little we had. Once, Jean gave his only pair of winter gloves to an old man in the market whose fingers were turning blue. When I asked him why, he smiled and said, "Because love is worth more than comfort." That kind of talk scared me. In school, we learned that love belonged to the leader and the party, not to ordinary people. I didn't know which voice to believe, so I started keeping their secret, not out of loyalty, but out of fear of being connected to something forbidden. I told myself they were wrong, that they were confused, and that one day I would not be like them. The pressure to conform in Hamhung was everywhere. Loudspeakers in the streets repeated speeches from morning to night. At dawn, we lined up to bow before portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. Even children learned to shout slogans with their fists raised high. At 15, I joined the Youth League, where we pledged to defend the country from traitors and religious criminals. During drills, instructors told us how spies use Bibles to trick good citizens. They said if we found anyone praying, we must expose them. Even if it's your own blood, one officer said, the party must come first. Those words stayed with me. I wanted to be a good daughter, but I also wanted to be seen as a good citizen. In our country, the two were not the same. Every day I felt like walking a tightrope between fear and survival. At home, I started to notice small things that made me uneasy. My mother would hide rice under the floorboards, saying it was for guests. Sometimes strangers visited after dark, quiet people with worn shoes and tired eyes. They never stayed long. I asked who they were, and she said, "Friends from the countryside." But their faces told another story. Once, when one of them left, I found a folded paper under a bowl on the table. It was a handwritten verse, though I didn't know it then. "Bless those who persecute you." I didn't understand what persecute meant. When I showed it to Gene, his face went pale. He snatched it from my hand and burned it over the stove. "You didn't see that," he said firmly. That night, I lay awake thinking that maybe my own home was the enemy's hiding place. I began to live two lives. Outside, I was the loyal student, shouting slogans louder than anyone else, attending every meeting, reporting on my classmates' behavior to our instructors. Inside, I was the silent observer, watching my parents walk on dangerous ground. I envied my friends who lived simple lives without secrets. I wanted to believe the propaganda that faith was foolish, that religion was a sickness. But each time I saw my mother's peace in the middle of hunger and fear, I felt a strange pull inside me. It wasn't admiration. It was resentment. How could she smile when everything around us was falling apart? How could she still believe in something that could destroy us all? The more I tried to understand, the more distant I became from her. My love turned into quiet shame. The older I became, the heavier that shame grew. I remember one winter evening when the neighborhood chief visited our apartment for inspection. My heart raced as he stepped inside. My mother quickly hid the small wooden cross that hung behind the curtain. Gene offered the chief tea, his hands shaking slightly. The chief's eyes moved slowly around the room, and I prayed silently that he would find nothing. After he left, I exploded in anger. "Why do you risk everything for a book?" I shouted. My mother didn't yell back. She only said, "Because the truth is worth any cost." Her calmness enraged me. That night I sat alone, thinking that her truth might one day destroy my future. I decided I would never be like her, never choose faith over survival. In that moment, the seed of betrayal was planted deep inside me. At school, loyalty was rewarded. I saw classmates promoted for exposing their own relatives who had spoken carelessly. They received better rations, new shoes, even praise during assembly. I began to wonder what would happen if I ever had to make such a choice. Would I stay silent or protect myself? The thought haunted me. The party made it easy to doubt your own family. They taught us that the leader was our true parent and the state our real home. I started to believe it. When teachers said, "There is no God, only the marshal," I repeated it loudly, hoping that my voice would drown out my mother's whispered prayers in my mind. Every night I told myself I was different from her. I was strong. I was loyal. But deep down, I knew I was afraid of both the government and the God she believed in. The turning point came when I was 18. I had been chosen to attend a youth training program in Pyongyang. Rare opportunity for someone from Hamhung. It meant prestige, better food, and possibly a future government post. But before I could go, the district officer visited our home to verify our family background. When he asked about religion, my mouth went dry. My mother hesitated before answering, saying softly, "We are loyal citizens." Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, pleading silently. I nodded, but inside I felt a storm. For the first time, I realized that her secret could take everything away from me. I hated the weakness that trembled in my chest. That night, while packing, I looked at her small Bible hidden under the blanket. I wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't. Instead, I stared at it until dawn, my heart split in two. In Pyongyang, life was brighter and colder at the same time. The streets were clean, the parades endless, the slogans louder. I studied political science, learning how loyalty kept a nation strong. I learned to give speeches about devotion to the leader, to memorize his sayings like prayers. But no matter how hard I tried, the memory of home followed me. During national holidays, when others celebrated, I remembered my mother and Jean sitting quietly in their dim apartment. I imagined them praying while sirens echoed outside. I started to fear that one day, someone would find out about them. Every knock on the door in my dormitory made me think of soldiers entering our house back home. That fear began to twist into anger. I blamed them for my anxiety. I told myself that if anything ever happened to me because of them, I would not stay silent. By the time I returned to Hamhung for a visit, I was no longer the quiet girl who watched in silence. I was confident, trained, and proud of my position as a loyal youth delegate. But when I entered our small apartment, the same smell of kerosene and boiled corn greeted me, and so did the same secret darkness. My mother looked older, thinner, but her eyes still held that strange peace. Jean smiled and asked about the capital, but I could see the tension behind his kindness. When night fell, I heard the same soft singing again, the same words I hadn't forgotten since childhood. My chest tightened with shame and fear. In that moment, I knew that whatever love or peace they had found, I didn't want it. I wanted freedom from the burden of their faith. That was the night when betrayal stopped being a thought and started to take shape. I didn't report them that day, not yet. But as I walked through the cold streets of Hamhung, passing portraits of smiling leaders and banners declaring loyalty is life, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had lived between two truths, two loyalties, two gods. One demanded obedience, the other offered peace. I didn't understand either, but I knew one thing. Obedience brought food and safety. Peace brought danger. I was tired of living in fear. Tired of being the daughter of people who chose death over silence. I told myself that one day I would end it. That one day I would protect myself no matter what it cost. I didn't know then how high that cost would be or how deeply it would scar me. But the decision was already growing in my heart like a shadow waiting for its moment. The morning it happened was cold enough to sting my skin. I was walking back from the food center when a man in a dark coat stopped me outside the bridge in Hamhung. His shoes were too clean for an ordinary worker, and his eyes studied me like I was a book he had already read. "You are Miran, yes?" he said quietly. I nodded. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "You've been noticed," he continued. "You're loyal, smart, and from a family that has certain issues." My hands went numb. He asked me to follow him to the district office, saying it was just for a short conversation. The car waiting nearby had tinted windows. As I sat in the back seat, my heart raced. I didn't know if I was going to be punished or praised. Both felt equally possible in our country. Inside the district office, the walls smelled of dust and old smoke. A portrait of the marshal looked down at me, as if judging my soul. The man led me into a small room and poured tea I couldn't drink. He spoke softly, his tone careful. "You are young, Miran," he said. "We know your mother and stepfather have been misled by dangerous foreign teachings." I stayed silent. He leaned closer. "The state values truth. It rewards those who protect it." From his pocket, he pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table. The edge of green paper peeked out, American dollars. I had never seen real ones before. "This is yours," he said. "If you help us find where they meet and who visits them." My throat tightened. He smiled again. "You will be helping the Republic. And yourself." He pushed the envelope closer until it touched my trembling hand. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The words "dangerous foreign teachings" echoed in my mind. I imagined my mother whispering prayers in the next room, unaware of what I had been offered. My thoughts fought like two armies inside me. One side whispered loyalty, fear, survival. The other side whispered family, love, and shame. But fear was stronger. Fear always wins in North Korea. I thought about my time in Pyongyang, the warmth, the full meals, the respect I had tasted. I wanted it back. I told myself that the authorities already knew. They just wanted me to confirm it. I told myself that giving them what they wanted would protect me, not harm them. Lies can sound like logic when your heart is desperate. By dawn, my decision was made. I would go back to the office and give them what they wanted. I would choose safety. When I returned the next day, the same officer was waiting. His expression didn't change when he saw me. "So," he said, "you have something to tell us?" My mouth went dry. I looked at the table instead of his face. "They meet at our house," I said softly. "At night when the lights are off. They sing and read from a small book. I don't know the others' names, but they come often." The words felt like stones dropping into a deep well. Each one made a sound I could not take back. He wrote quickly, asking short questions, times, details, directions. When he finished, he lit another cigarette, exhaled slowly, and said, "You've done the right thing, Miran. The Republic rewards its loyal daughters." He slid the envelope toward me again. This time I took it. My fingers shook as I felt the paper inside. It was heavier than guilt. I walked home through falling snow, the envelope hidden inside my coat. Every step sounded too loud. My mother greeted me when I came in, her smile tired but warm. I tried to smile back, but it felt forced. Jean was fixing a broken heater. I noticed his hands were cracked from cold. When my mother asked if I was all right, I said I was fine, that I had only been called to fill out a youth league form. She didn't question it. She trusted me. That trust hurt more than any punishment could. After dinner, she began to hum softly, the same song I had heard since childhood. For the first time, it annoyed me. I went to my room, closed the door, and pulled out the envelope. I opened it and saw 5 crisp $100 bills. I will be paid the remaining after my parents are captured. My chest tightened. They looked like power, but they felt like poison. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then came the pounding on the door, sharp, commanding. My mother jolted awake. Jean went to open it, but the door burst inward before he could. Men in gray uniforms flooded the room. One shouted, "Search everything." Another grabbed Jean by the arm and threw him to the ground. My mother screamed his name. The officer in charge pulled out a paper and read charges I couldn't understand through my own heartbeat. Illegal gatherings, possession of religious materials, treason against the state. The words cut through the air like knives. My mother's eyes searched for me, and in that split second she understood. I didn't speak. I didn't move. She saw it in my face, the truth she had never wanted to believe. "Miran," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was you." Time stopped. The officers dragged Jean to his feet, but I couldn't look at him. My mother took a step toward me, her hands shaking, but one of the soldiers held her back. "Why?" she asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Fear locked my throat. The officer ordered her to stay quiet. She didn't. She looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse, grief. "Miran, I forgive you," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear. "You don't know what you're doing." Then she began to pray. Right there, in front of the soldiers. Her voice rose above the chaos. "Lord, forgive my daughter. Protect her heart. Let her see your light." One of the men shouted and struck her across the face, but she kept praying, her lips moving even as blood traced down her chin. Jean tried to speak, but they hit him too. The sound of boots, shouting, and breaking furniture filled the room. I stood frozen against the wall, my body shaking. My mother's eyes met mine one last time before they covered her head with a sack. "I love you," she whispered. Those were her last words to me. I wanted to run to her, to undo everything, but my legs wouldn't move. The soldiers pushed them toward the door. My mother kept praying until her voice faded into the hallway. Then came silence. I fell to my knees. The floor was cold, the air thick with dust and fear. I had chosen survival, but in that moment, I felt more dead than alive. I didn't cry. Tears felt too small for what I had done. I just sat there, staring at the door that had swallowed my family. When the trucks outside started their engines, I ran to the window. Through the frost, I could barely see their figures being forced into the back. My mother turned her head slightly, as if she could sense me watching. Even with the sack over her face, I knew it was her. I wanted to shout, to tell her I was sorry, but my voice stayed trapped in my chest. The truck drove away, its taillights fading into the snow. The street fell quiet again, as if nothing had happened. I stood there until the sky turned gray. When I finally turned around, our home looked like a stranger's place, broken, empty, full of echoes. On the table lay a torn page from the Bible the soldiers had missed. It said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." I read it once, then crumpled it in my hand, too afraid to believe it. The next afternoon, a man in uniform knocked on my door. He handed me an envelope and a paper stamped with red ink. "For your cooperation," he said flatly. I opened it after he left. The remaining 5 crisp bills were inside, along with a note of gratitude from the district office. My stomach twisted. I should have felt victory. I had done what they asked. I had survived. But the money didn't shine anymore. It looked pale, dirty, wrong. Still, I folded it carefully and hid it under my bed. Survival required silence, and silence had its price. I told myself that crying would change nothing. The state rewarded obedience, not grief. I sat there for a long time, the envelope heavy in my lap, trying to remember my mother's face before fear changed it. But all I could see were her lips moving in prayer for me as they dragged her away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was too quiet. The air smelled like smoke and dust, reminders of the raid. I replayed every second in my mind. The knock, the shouting, my mother's voice. Her prayer echoed louder than any punishment the regime could give. "Forgive my daughter." I didn't understand how she could say that. I had destroyed her life, yet she asked her God to protect mine. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to silence the memory, but her voice lived inside me now. When dawn came, I looked at the window where I had last seen her and whispered into the cold air, "I'm sorry." The words disappeared like breath on glass. The city outside woke as if nothing had happened. For everyone else, it was just another day. For me, it was the day silence earned its price. $1,000 and a lifetime of regret. Chapter 3. What $1,000 couldn't buy. The morning after my parents were taken, I sat on the floor staring at the envelope. The 10 bills inside looked too clean for the world they had bought. Outside, the air was thick with coal smoke, and the neighborhood was already whispering. I knew they would pretend not to know what happened. In North Korea, silence is survival. Still, every sound outside felt like accusation. I forced myself to stand and open the window, letting the cold air numb me. Then I took out 1 bill, folded it neatly, and hid the rest under my mattress. That afternoon, I walked to the market, the same place my mother used to go. I bought rice, soap, and meat for the first time in years. The sellers looked at the foreign money with wide eyes. One asked if I had family abroad. I lied and said I worked for the government. After that day, things began to change. I learned that money could clean even the dirtiest reputation. The neighborhood chief, who once barely noticed me, began greeting me with forced warmth. At the youth league office, I was given a position as an assistant record keeper. A small but respected job. People whispered that I had connections. No one dared to ask questions about my parents. I bought a new coat from a Chinese trader, soft and thick with fur at the collar. I had never owned anything so fine. The first night I wore it, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, convincing myself that I looked strong, successful, untouchable. But as I turned away, I caught my reflection from another angle and saw a stranger looking back. Someone who smiled without joy, someone whose eyes were darker than before. With the money, I also bought a small radio, the kind that could catch foreign broadcasts if the air was clear. It was my secret luxury. I told myself it was for learning languages, but really, I wanted to hear voices that didn't belong to the state. Sometimes I caught faint static that turned into strange songs or prayers in English. I couldn't understand the words, but they made me uneasy. I always turned it off quickly, afraid the neighbors might hear. Still, the sounds lingered in my mind like ghosts. I also bought extra food and shared it with the chief's family once. He smiled and said, "You're a good citizen, Miran. The party rewards loyal hearts." His praise should have comforted me, but instead it left me hollow. I realized I had traded the warmth of my mother's voice for the cold approval of strangers who didn't care if I lived or died. Every improvement in my life seemed to come with a weight I couldn't see, but could feel pressing on my chest. My bed was softer, but I couldn't sleep. My meals were bigger, but they tasted like ash. People respected me more, yet I had never felt so alone. I kept telling myself I had done what was necessary, that my parents would have ruined me if I hadn't acted. But their faces refused to leave me. I would see my mother's lips moving in prayer each time I closed my eyes. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night, thinking I heard her whisper my name. I would sit up, trembling, whispering to the empty room, "Stop. Please stop." But it didn't stop. Even in my dreams, she was there, her face covered, her voice calm, forgiving. That forgiveness haunted me more than any curse could have. I tried to distract myself with work. My new position meant I handled documents about ration distribution, names, and family records. The job was simple, repetitive, and quiet, perfect for someone who wanted to hide from their own thoughts. Each morning I walked through the same gray streets, bowing to the portraits on the walls, pretending I was proud. Sometimes I caught myself staring at other families, wondering if they too hid forbidden beliefs behind their walls. I told myself that I was safe now, that I belonged to the winning side. But deep down, I knew that loyalty bought with fear is no loyalty at all. One afternoon, I saw a little girl in the market holding her mother's hand. The woman looked poor, her clothes thin, but she smiled with real peace. I turned away quickly, my throat tightening. It reminded me too much of what I had destroyed. As weeks turned to months, the city began to feel smaller. Every street corner, every echo reminded me of something I wanted to forget. I avoided people who had known my family. When neighbors tried to speak kindly, I kept my answers short. I told myself I didn't need anyone. Loneliness felt safer than conversation. At night, I started drinking cheap rice wine, just enough to make the memories blur. But even that didn't help. My stepfather's voice sometimes returned in dreams. He never shouted. He just looked at me silently, the way he used to when he fixed things, steady, patient, kind. That look was worse than anger. I woke from those dreams sweating, clutching my pillow as if it could save me. The more I tried to bury the past, the deeper it dug its claws into me. The $1,000 couldn't buy silence for my heart. One day, I was summoned to a small meeting at the district office. I felt a chill even before I entered. The same officer who had given me the money greeted me with a nod. "You've done well," he said. "You're proving your loyalty." He offered me tea and talked about opportunities, hinting that I could advance if I continued to assist the Republic. His praise sounded like chains. As he spoke, I noticed the smoke curling from his cigarette, twisting upward like a question I couldn't answer. When he finished, he smiled and said, "The state remembers those who serve." I forced a smile back. On my way home, I realized I hadn't thanked him. I couldn't. Gratitude felt false. All I could think of was my mother's last prayer. The words repeated in my head, "Lord, forgive my daughter." I wanted to forget them, but they had become part of my breath. As the seasons changed, I began to measure time by silence. Each morning I walked to work in the same gray uniform. Each evening I returned to my quiet apartment. The heater hummed softly, but it couldn't warm the emptiness inside me. I tried to convince myself that I was happy. I had food, comfort, safety. People respected me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something invisible and deep. Some nights, I dreamed I was back in our old home, hearing my mother sing softly while Jean fixed the heater. In the dream, I wanted to warn them to stop, to hide better, but when I opened my mouth, no words came. Then soldiers burst in, and I woke up gasping. I hated sleeping after that. Night became my enemy, and daylight only reminded me how alone I truly was. I started avoiding gatherings. When colleagues invited me to celebrations, I made excuses. I couldn't stand the laughter, the songs praising the leader, the empty smiles. Every cheerful voice reminded me of the silence in my own home. Sometimes, after work, I walked down by the river where no one went. I would stand there, watching the black water move under the ice, and wonder where my parents had been taken. No one ever told me. No one ever would. People disappeared in North Korea like they were erased from existence. Still, I whispered into the wind, asking questions I couldn't answer. Were they still alive? Did they hate me? Or were they still praying for me somewhere far away? The only reply was the wind, carrying the faintest echo of a song I thought I had forgotten. That song followed me all the way home every night. Over time, I learned to hide my shaking hands by keeping busy. I worked late, organized files no one read, smiled at my superiors. I became known as efficient and quiet, a model citizen. But beneath that mask, I was breaking. My reflection in the mirror began to change. My eyes were always tired, my skin pale. I stopped recognizing myself. Some nights I turned on the radio again, hoping to hear something, anything, that would make me feel less alone. Once, I caught a faint voice in Korean, reading a verse I didn't fully understand. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." I switched it off quickly, but my heart wouldn't stop pounding. It felt like the words were meant for me. I wanted to believe them, but I didn't know how. Comfort was a foreign word in a country where guilt was the only inheritance I had left. The richer I looked, the poorer I felt inside. I bought better shoes, new curtains, even a watch. But each object seemed to remind me of what I had lost. Nothing filled the space left by their absence. People admired me for my composure, but they didn't know it was emptiness that made me calm. I started to envy the poor who laughed openly, who didn't hide behind fear. Once, I passed a group of women sharing corn near the market, singing softly. For a brief moment, I thought I saw my mother among them. My legs froze. The woman turned, and of course it wasn't her. But the sight of that simple joy tore something open inside me. I walked away quickly, wiping my face with my sleeve. I told myself I was strong, but strength that hides from love is only another kind of weakness. And I was full of it. By the end of that year, the money was nearly gone. I still had the last few bills hidden untouched, as if they could erase what they represented. Sometimes I took them out just to stare, wondering if my parents' lives were worth so little. The paper felt smooth, cold, and empty, like everything else I had gained. My heart was a locked room filled with ghosts. No one knew, and no one cared. I kept moving, smiling when required, bowing when expected. But each night, when I turned off the lights, the silence returned to claim me. My mother's last words still echoed, her prayer, her forgiveness. They were supposed to bring peace. But to me, they were a reminder that love could outlive betrayal. That truth frightened me more than anything else. I had everything the state could offer, but the one thing I needed most was the one thing $1,000 could never buy. The months that followed were quiet on the outside but stormy inside me. I lived each day as if nothing was wrong. I smiled when people greeted me and bowed to the portraits like everyone else. But something deep within me was breaking apart. Every night, when I closed the door of my small apartment, the air felt heavy, like it was filled with invisible eyes watching me. I stopped turning on the lights in the evenings because I couldn't bear to see my reflection anymore. I would sit by the window, looking out at the city lights of Hamhung, wondering if my parents were still alive somewhere, or if their faces had already faded from this world. I told myself I had moved on, but even silence began to sound like their voices. Each time I tried to rest, my heart beat faster, whispering that peace had left me forever. The slow erosion of my spirit began with the smallest things. I stopped caring about the little luxuries I once craved. The food that used to taste like reward now felt tasteless. The radio I had loved for its strange songs stayed off most nights. My job no longer gave me pride. Every file I stamped and every report I signed reminded me of obedience without heart. When colleagues laughed, I pretended to laugh too, but my smile felt like paper, flat and false. Even my body began to betray me. My hands shook, and sleep became rare. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face covered with the sack, her lips still moving in prayer. Other times, I heard Jin's calm voice telling me to fix the broken heater, only for me to wake up in tears. I didn't know what was happening, but I felt like something unseen was closing in. One evening, after work, I came home to find that the power had gone out. The streets were dark, and the only light came from the moon reflecting on the snow outside. I lit a small candle and sat on the floor beside my bed. The quiet was too deep. It pressed against my chest until I could hardly breathe. I reached under the mattress and pulled out the last few bills I had left. I spread them on the floor and stared at them for a long time. The green color looked dull in the candlelight. My fingers traced the numbers as if they could speak. These were the same dollars that had cost my parents freedom, the same paper that had bought me food and clothes but stolen my soul. I whispered to myself, "Is this what I sold them for?" My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. The air didn't answer. Only the candle flickered. That night, I couldn't escape the weight pressing on me. I sat for hours, watching the candle burn lower and lower until only smoke remained. The darkness felt alive. I wrapped my coat around me and leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. For the first time in my life, I spoke into the empty room. "If there is a God," I whispered, "if you exist, why did you take them and leave me?" The words came out raw and bitter. "They loved you. I betrayed them. Why am I still here?" My voice cracked, but once I started, I couldn't stop. Years of silence poured out of me. I confessed everything to the shadows, my fear, my pride, my lies. I shouted at the ceiling until my throat hurt. I begged for answers that didn't come. Then I collapsed to the floor and began to sob. The sound of my crying filled the room like rain hitting broken glass. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but it didn't feel like sleep. It felt like being pulled into something deeper, a space between waking and dreaming. The room around me faded into a soft, dim light. At first, I thought it was the moon, but it grew brighter, warmer. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. The air shimmered like water. Then I saw him. A figure stood in front of me, quiet, still, yet powerful. His presence filled the room without noise. I couldn't describe his face, but I knew who he was without being told. Every story my mother had whispered, every forbidden name I had tried to forget, suddenly became real. It was Jesus, not as a picture or statue, but as a living presence. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, to hide, but there was nowhere left to hide. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw everything. My lies, my betrayal, my fear. His gaze wasn't angry, but it pierced through every wall I had built. I saw my mother's prayer, my stepfather's silence, the night I gave their names away. I wanted him to shout, to condemn me, to end me, but he didn't. He stepped closer, and in a voice both soft and thunderous, he asked, "Why did you betray those who loved me?" The words echoed through the room, through my bones, through my soul. It wasn't accusation. It was truth. My knees gave out. I fell to the floor, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I tried to answer, but all I could say was, "I was afraid." The words came out as a whisper, drowned by my sobbing. Fear had ruled me, and now it was destroying me from the inside out. His presence filled the air like a weight, yet it wasn't crushing, it was cleansing. Every sin I had buried rose to the surface. I saw the faces of my parents, the soldiers, the money, the lies. Each image burned like fire in my mind, but beneath the pain was something else, mercy. He didn't move closer, but I could feel his love like warmth spreading through the coldest parts of me. I cried harder, my forehead pressed to the floor. "I don't deserve forgiveness," I said. My voice was shaking. "I don't deserve anything." For a long moment, there was silence. Then I felt a presence beside me, as if someone knelt near me. I didn't see his hand, but I felt it, light, gentle, resting over my head. The warmth spread through me, and I wept until I had no tears left. The quiet that followed was unlike any silence I had ever known. When I finally looked up, the light was brighter, yet it didn't hurt my eyes. Jesus' face was calm, his expression filled with sorrow, but also with love deeper than I had ever seen. I tried to speak, but words failed me. My chest hurt from the weight of everything I had carried. I whispered, "I killed them. I killed my own mother and father." My voice broke again. He didn't deny it. He didn't excuse it. But somehow his gaze told me that even this, my worst sin, was not beyond his reach. I remembered something my mother used to say when I was little. "Even in darkness, his light still finds you." I had never believed her until that moment. The light around me pulsed softly like a heartbeat, and I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from him. And somehow it was also reaching into me. The more I looked at him, the more the shame inside me turned into something else. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer choking me. I felt seen, completely, and yet not rejected. I couldn't explain it. I had betrayed everything sacred. Yet here he was, standing before me, offering what I thought I had destroyed forever, grace. My voice trembled as I whispered, "Can you ever forgive someone like me?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Then his answer came, not as a sound, but as a knowing inside my heart. "I already have." Those words struck deeper than any wound I had ever felt. I cried again, but this time, not from despair, from release. My body shook as years of guilt poured out of me. The tears that fell onto the floor felt clean, as if they were washing something away that I couldn't reach on my own. When I finally lifted my head again, the light began to fade. I reached out, afraid he would disappear. "Please," I whispered, "don't leave me." But I heard the same stillness reply within me, "I will never leave you." Slowly, the room returned to its dark, familiar shape. The candle burned down to a stub, the cold air biting at my skin. But everything felt different. The fear that had ruled me for years was gone. In its place was a fragile peace, like the first hint of dawn after a long night. I sat there for a long time, staring at my empty hands. I didn't know how to pray, not really, but I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't a perfect prayer. It wasn't even a full sentence, but it was real, and it was mine. For the first time, I felt that maybe I wasn't beyond forgiveness after all. That night, silence no longer frightened me. It was still there, but it had changed. It didn't accuse me anymore. It listened. I sat beside the candle until the light went out completely, whispering every word I could think of, not as confession to a government, but as a cry to heaven. My prayers had no structure, no order. I spoke like a child learning to talk again, broken, uncertain, but sincere. "I don't know what happens next," I said softly, "but if you save me tonight, help me live differently." I looked around my small room, the same one that had once felt like a prison, and for the first time it felt open. The same walls that had witnessed my guilt now stood in quiet witness to my first prayer. The money was still under my mattress, but its power had died that night. All that remained was grace. When morning came, the world outside looked the same, but I wasn't the same. The snow on the rooftops shimmered brighter, and the air didn't feel as heavy. I didn't know what to do, or how to live differently, but deep inside, I knew something had shifted forever. The guilt that once chained me was still there, but it had lost its voice. I had met the one my mother prayed to, the one I had betrayed without knowing him, and he hadn't turned away. That was the miracle. I rose from the floor slowly, my knees stiff, my face swollen from crying, but my heart lighter than it had been in years. I whispered one last sentence before opening the door to the cold morning air. "Thank you for finding me." The silence that answered me was gentle, and for the first time, it felt holy. The morning after that night of light, I felt like the same world had turned into something new. The streets of Hamhung still looked gray, the people still walked with bowed heads, and the same loudspeakers shouted the same words, but inside me something had shifted. I was no longer only afraid. There was a strange peace that didn't come from safety, food, or warmth. It came from the memory of his presence. I didn't know what to do next. I only knew that I couldn't go back to living as before. My job at the ration office felt like a lie. Every time I stamped a document, I saw my mother's praying hands. I wanted to know more about the God who had met me in my darkness, but I didn't even know where to start. Bibles were forbidden, and churches didn't exist in daylight. All I had was a fragile faith and a dangerous hope. In the weeks that followed, I began to search quietly. I listened in the markets, in the queues, in whispers at the train station, hoping to catch some hint of others like my parents, people who believed in secret. But in North Korea, curiosity can kill faster than hunger. I learned to ask without asking. One day, while buying rice, I overheard two women talking softly about meetings and songs. My heart raced, but I said nothing. That night, I followed one of them from a distance as she walked toward the edge of the city, past the factories and toward the hills. I stopped when she entered a small storage shed behind a broken fence. For a long time, I just watched the faint light through the cracks. I was too afraid to go in, but something in me longed for that light, the same kind that had filled my room that night. The next week, I gathered my courage and returned. It was late, the streets empty. I waited near the shed until I heard faint singing. No instruments, just human voices trembling softly. I pushed the door open a little. Inside were 6 people, kneeling on the floor with their heads bowed. A man was whispering from a torn book. I didn't understand the words, but I recognized the sound of prayer. My heart pounded. I stepped inside, and every head turned toward me. Their eyes were full of fear. One woman gasped. I realized they thought I was an informant. My voice shook as I said, "I'm not here to report you. Please, I just want to pray." The silence that followed felt endless. Then the man with the book said quietly, "Close the door." I did, trembling. That was the first time since my parents' arrest that I had been surrounded by believers again. They didn't trust me, not at first. I didn't blame them. In a country built on betrayal, trust was a luxury few could afford. For days, they let me sit near the back of the shed without speaking much to me. They prayed in whispers, shared food in silence, and left quickly after every gathering. I watched them carefully. The way they bowed their heads, the way they treated each other with gentle respect. There was no leader, no grand speech, just quiet love that filled the space like warmth in winter. I wanted to tell them everything about what I had done, but shame closed my mouth. I didn't even know how to say I had betrayed my own parents. Yet, when they sang, I joined softly, even though I didn't know all the words. I could feel something stirring again. The same peace I had felt when Jesus appeared to me, fragile but real. Soon, rumors began spreading at my workplace. Someone had noticed that I left early and avoided the social gatherings. My silence, once seen as loyalty, was now viewed with suspicion. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into his office. "Miran," he said, "you've been distant lately. The party needs active hearts." His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. I lied and said I wasn't feeling well. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't believe me. That evening, I packed a small bag, hid the remaining dollar bills in my pocket, and left my apartment quietly. I couldn't risk being watched. I went to stay near the old railway yards, sleeping in empty storerooms and moving often. I was no longer just a woman with a secret. I had become a threat in the eyes of the system. But even in fear, I felt freer than I had ever been before. Days turned into weeks. The believers in the shed learned my name, and I learned theirs. There was Sung, the quiet man with the torn Bible, Eun-hee, a young widow who had lost her husband in a labor camp, and Min, an old man who still carried scars on his hands from chains. Each of them had a story of loss, but none of them spoke with bitterness. When I finally told them my story, about the officers, the envelope, the night of betrayal, the room fell silent. No one looked at me for a long time. I expected them to tell me to leave. My voice broke as I said, "I don't deserve to be here." Eun-hee was the first to move. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "None of us deserve to be here," she whispered. "That's why grace is real." Her words hit me harder than any punishment. For the first time, I believed that forgiveness was more than a dream. Still, not everyone welcomed me. One man, a former teacher named June, couldn't even look at me after hearing my confession. His sister had been taken years ago in a raid I had helped report. Though I hadn't known her name, I had been part of that system. One evening, when I tried to speak to him, he turned away. "Some wounds," he said quietly, "are too deep to talk about." His distance cut me deeply, but I didn't argue. I understood. I prayed silently every night for him, for all of them, and for myself. My prayers were clumsy, full of pauses and tears, but they were real. I asked God to show me how to live without hiding behind lies. Sometimes I wondered if my parents could see me now, kneeling among the same kind of believers I had betrayed. The thought made my heart ache, but it also pushed me to keep going. The more time I spent with the group, the more I began to see the cost of faith. We moved our meeting place often. Sometimes a barn, sometimes an empty warehouse, sometimes near the river. Each time we gathered, there was fear in the air, but also peace. The soldiers, the raids, the punishments, they were all part of life, yet these people still sang. Their courage humbled me. Once, after a long day of work, I found a note slipped into my coat pocket. It said, "They are watching again. Be careful." My hands shook as I read it. The next night, we didn't meet. We all went silent for a week. I hid in an abandoned shed outside the city, living on scraps and memories. During those days, I talked to God more than ever before. My words were simple. Help me, protect them, forgive me. I didn't need fancy prayers. The silence between my words felt enough. When we finally met again, the group was smaller. Sung told me that Min had been taken during a checkpoint search. No one knew where he was. The grief was quiet but deep. That night, I couldn't stop crying. He was too old for prison, I said. Uni nodded, tears streaming down her face. But he wasn't afraid, she whispered. He said, if they catch me, let them see Jesus in my eyes. I didn't know how anyone could have such peace, but I wanted to. That night, as we prayed together, I felt a new strength rise inside me. Faith wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning to live differently because of it. I had carried my guilt like a stone, but now it was slowly turning into something else. A reason to love, a reason to serve, a reason to believe that my mother's prayer had reached heaven after all. The first time I experienced real forgiveness from another human being came unexpectedly. It was during a small meeting weeks later, in a shed near the river. After we finished praying, June, the teacher who had avoided me, stayed behind while others left. My heart raced as he approached. His eyes were tired, but softer than before. I thought I hated you, he said quietly. I blamed you for everything. But last night, I dreamed of my sister. She told me to forgive. His voice broke. So I am. Tears filled my eyes before I could speak. I wanted to thank him, but no words felt enough. He placed his hand gently on my arm. Live differently, he said, and that will be enough. That night, I wept more than I had in years, not from guilt, but from gratitude. Forgiveness, when it finally came, felt like a door opening in the middle of winter. After that, something changed in me. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled me. I still hid, still moved carefully, still watched for officers at every corner, but my heart was lighter. I began to help the group in small ways, carrying food, passing notes, warning others when raids were rumored. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because love demanded action. Sometimes, late at night, I walked to the hill outside the city and looked at the stars. I would whisper, I'm still here. It was my way of speaking to God and to my parents at the same time. The same sky that had watched my betrayal was now watching my slow return to faith. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. I was forgiven, though never forgotten. And maybe that was enough to start again. Becoming part of the underground church was not like joining a group. It was like entering another world. Everything was quiet, hidden, and trembling with danger. We didn't have buildings or banners. We didn't even call ourselves a church. We were just people who refused to stop believing. After June forgave me, I was no longer only a visitor. I was one of them. I began helping prepare small gatherings, finding safe places to meet, and carrying pieces of torn scripture hidden in my clothes. Every moment was a risk, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't since childhood. When we prayed, I no longer stayed silent. My voice joined theirs, rising softly through the darkness. I often remembered my mother's voice, how she prayed with the same quiet fire. It felt like her prayers had found me through the years, guiding me back to the faith I once betrayed. We lived like shadows. Every meeting was planned with whispers and caution. We moved often, sometimes in a shed, sometimes by the river, other times in an old storeroom behind a closed factory. We never met twice in the same place. Each person carried part of the message, a verse or a song. So if one of us was caught, the others could still continue. My job was to walk the routes first and check if the path was clear. Because of my past work with government records, I knew how patrols moved, how schedules changed, and how suspicion spread. I used that knowledge to keep us safe. Sometimes I thought of it as repayment for what I had done. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was grace turning my guilt into purpose. For once, my experience as a betrayer was being used to protect rather than destroy. At night, I began memorizing entire passages from the Bible that Sung had carefully written on scraps of paper. Paper could be burned or lost, but memory could not. I whispered the words until they sank into my heart. One of my favorites was, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." I clung to that sentence every time I felt fear creeping back. I had spent years helping the darkness grow, but now I was walking with the light, quietly, cautiously, but surely. We met to share stories, to pray, and sometimes just to sit together without speaking. The silence among believers felt different from the silence of guilt. It wasn't empty, it was full of presence. The first time I led a short prayer for the group, my hands trembled, but when I opened my eyes, I saw tears on their faces. That was when I realized prayer was not about words. It was about surrender. Our church began to grow slowly, one person at a time. Uni brought a young woman who had lost her husband in a factory accident. Sung helped a soldier's sister who had secretly kept a Bible page hidden for years. I found myself caring for people I had once been trained to report. Sometimes, I still flinched when someone mentioned the secret police. I was always afraid someone would recognize me or remember my past. But no one ever did. They only saw the person I was becoming, not the one I used to be. That too felt like a miracle. When I shared food with them, I often remembered the times my mother had done the same, giving away what little she had. I finally understood that love was not about words. It was about giving, even when you had nothing left to give. That truth became my new strength. The first time we helped someone escape, it felt like walking on the edge of a sword. A man named Hoon, who had been part of another underground group, came to us bruised and weak. His congregation had been caught, and he was the only one who got away. He wanted to reach the border near the Yalu River, where he could cross into China. Because of my knowledge of checkpoints, I knew which nights the guards changed shifts and which paths were least watched. It took 3 nights of careful planning and silent movement. Unhee and I guided him through the narrow back roads, pretending to be traders carrying goods. My heart pounded every step. Once, a soldier stopped us and asked for our papers. I smiled and lied, saying we were delivering supplies for a factory. He nodded and let us pass. When we finally saw the river, I knew we had made it. Before Hoon crossed, he turned to me and said, "I heard about you, Miran. You used to work for them." I froze, expecting anger. But instead, he smiled faintly. "Now you work for him. That is enough." His words struck me deeply. We prayed together quietly by the river, our hands trembling in the cold. When he stepped into the water and disappeared into the dark, I felt a strange mix of fear and joy. We didn't know if he would make it, but we believed God would guide him. On our way back, Uni whispered, "Your parents would be proud." The words hit me like a wave. For years, I had lived with the weight of shame, but in that moment, I felt a glimpse of what redemption might look like. I had once delivered people into the hands of death. Now I was delivering them toward freedom. From that night on, I made it my quiet mission to protect those who believed. I started gathering small bits of information from my old contacts. Changes in patrol routes, upcoming inspections, new laws. I passed those warnings to the church carefully, always through coded notes. The same skills I had once used for betrayal were now tools of salvation. It was dangerous work, but the risk no longer terrified me. My fear had been replaced by purpose. Every time I saw a believer saved from arrest or warned in time, I felt like a part of my soul was being rebuilt. Sometimes, when I knelt to pray, I could almost feel my mother's hand on my shoulder. I imagined her voice saying, "This is what grace looks like, my daughter." I had lived for years believing I could never make anything right, but God was showing me that healing could grow even from ashes. Prayer became the center of everything. It wasn't something I did out of duty anymore. It became my breath. Each morning before I left whatever hiding place I slept in, I whispered words of trust. I prayed for those in prison, for those in hiding, and for those who had not yet heard of Jesus. When fear came, I prayed louder in my heart. Sometimes, when soldiers marched by, I prayed for them too, remembering that I had once been one of the cruel ones. Prayer changed the way I saw the world. It made even my enemies look human again. One night, as our group gathered near the edge of the city, we prayed for an hour straight. No one moved, no one spoke after we finished. The silence afterward felt holy. In that stillness, I understood that prayer wasn't just talking to God. It was letting him change the parts of you that words couldn't reach. The first time I shared my full story with the church was on a rainy night in an abandoned workshop near the sea. The sound of the waves mixed with the patter of rain on the roof. Everyone sat close together, their faces lit by a single lantern. My hands were shaking as I began. I told them everything, about the officers, the money, the betrayal, and the night I saw Jesus. As I spoke, some people cried softly. Others bowed their heads. When I finished, I expected silence, maybe judgment. Instead, Uni began to pray out loud. thanking God for his mercy. June followed, his voice trembling. If God can turn a betrayer into a sister, he said, then there is hope for all of us. I broke down crying. They surrounded me, their hands on my shoulders, praying for strength. That night, I learned that sharing your pain can become someone else's healing. As the months passed, I began to see courage in places I had never noticed before. It wasn't loud or proud. It was quiet, steady, and full of love. It was the courage of Unhi sharing her last piece of bread with a stranger. It was June teaching children to pray in whispers. It was Sung still carrying that torn Bible, even when it could cost him his life. I realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to love despite it. The believers I once called foolish were the bravest people I had ever known. Each day I lived among them, I saw more of what true love looked like. It wasn't romance or comfort. It was sacrifice. It was the love that had once led my parents to their deaths, the same love that now lived in me. For the first time, I understood why they never stopped believing. By the end of that year, our small group had grown into several connected gatherings across different towns. We didn't have leaders or titles, just trust and prayer. People called me sister, now a word I never thought I would deserve. Sometimes, when I walked home under the stars, I thought about how far I had come. The betrayer had become a protector. The enemy had become a servant. My past was still part of me, but it no longer defined me. Every breath, every whisper of prayer felt like a step toward redemption. I still carried scars, but they were reminders of grace, not guilt. And though danger surrounded us always, I had finally learned that fear loses its power when love becomes your reason for living. I was no longer the daughter of shame. I was a daughter of mercy, walking quietly but firmly in the footsteps of those I once betrayed. I lived now far from the gray streets of Hamhung. I crossed rivers, borders, and years of fear to reach this place of quiet freedom. I never thought I would survive long enough to see another country, to walk streets without soldiers, to speak words without checking who might be listening. I live today in a small town near Seoul, where the morning air smells of bread instead of coal smoke, and people laugh in the open. But even as life has changed around me, I carry the memories of where I came from. I wake each day remembering the narrow rooms, the whispers, the faces of those who never escaped. Sometimes, when I hear church bells ringing in the distance, I stop and close my eyes. The sound is sweet and painful at the same time. Freedom, I have learned, is both a gift and a reminder. Getting here was not simple. It took me 2 years of hiding, crossing into China, working in fields for food, then moving west with the help of believers who risked their lives to guide me. Every border felt like another test of faith. There were nights when I thought I would die of hunger or be captured, but I carried one verse in my mind like a shield. I will never leave you nor forsake you. When I finally reached South Korea, I was thin, weak, and scarred in ways no one could see. I remember standing in the immigration center, unable to answer when they asked my name. I whispered, Miran. It felt strange to speak it aloud in freedom, like the name itself had been reborn. I had once been known for betrayal, but now I wanted to be known for grace. That was the beginning of my new life. At first, the world outside North Korea was overwhelming. The colors, the lights, the noise, all of it felt too big for someone who had lived in whispers. I would sit for hours in the refugee center, staring at the television, amazed at how people spoke freely about their opinions and beliefs. No one bowed to portraits. No one feared their neighbors. But freedom didn't erase the past. Every night, I still saw my mother's face. I still heard her prayer. Lord, forgive my daughter. That voice was the thread that pulled me through every dark moment. Sometimes I walked by the Han River and imagined the Yalu River where I once helped a man escape. The water looked calm, but I knew what it meant to cross it. To me, rivers became symbols. One separated guilt from forgiveness. Another separated death from life. And each time I saw one, I thanked God for carrying me across. It took a long time before I dared to enter a real church. I was afraid people would ask too many questions or see the shame still clinging to me. But one Sunday morning, I walked past a small church near my apartment. The doors were open, and the singing spilled out into the street. I stood outside for a long time before stepping in. No guards, no fear, just people praying openly. When the pastor greeted me, his smile reminded me of the believers I left behind. He didn't ask where I came from. He simply said, "Welcome home." I sat in the last row, trembling as the congregation sang, "Amazing Grace." I had heard that song once on the radio years ago, but never understood the words. Now they hit me like waves. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Tears ran down my face as I realized I was finally living those words. As I began to rebuild my life, I started writing down my story in pieces. On notebooks, napkins, anything I could find. At first, it was just a way to release the memories that haunted me. But soon, I understood it was more than that. I wasn't writing for pity. I was writing for truth. For those still trapped in silence. For those who think they have gone too far to be forgiven. I wanted people to know what power fear can hold, but also how much stronger love can be. Each page became a confession and a testimony. When I wrote about the night I betrayed my parents, my hands shook. When I wrote about the night Jesus appeared to me, my heart burned with peace. I didn't write to forget my past. I wrote so no one else would make the same choice I did. My story became my healing. Sometimes I speak at small gatherings for other defectors. Many of them carry guilt for things they did to survive. Stealing, lying, betraying. When I tell them my story, the room often falls silent. I don't hide what I did. I tell them plainly. I sold my parents for $1,000. The words still taste bitter. But then I tell them the rest. And Jesus still found me. Their faces always change. Some cry. Some look away. Some ask, "How could he forgive you?" I tell them, because his love is not like ours. It's deeper, stronger, unearned. I tell them about the night he asked me the question that changed everything. Why did you betray those who loved me? That question still lives inside me. It doesn't wound me anymore. It reminds me who I was and who he made me now. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night with that question echoing softly in my heart. It isn't judgment anymore. It's invitation. Each time I hear it, I pray for those I betrayed, for those still suffering in the north, for the soldiers who once followed orders like I did. I've learned that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. When I remember my mother's face now, I no longer see her pain. I see her strength. I imagine her smiling, knowing that her prayer was answered. Her daughter, once a betrayer, now walks with the same faith she died for. That thought humbles me every day. It keeps me from pride and reminds me that redemption is not something you earn. It's something you receive and then live out. I can never repay what I took, but I can use my life to honor it. Today, I live quietly. I work at a small bakery run by a Christian family. I knead dough, pack bread, and hum softly as I work. Sometimes, I see North Korean refugees come through the door. They're thin, cautious, and tired, the way I once was. I give them extra food and whisper, "You're safe here." When I pray at night, I still pray the way my mother did, softly, but with fire in my chest. I pray for the underground church, for Eunhee, June, and Sung, wherever they may be. I don't know if they survived, but I believe their faith still burns somewhere in the shadows. I pray for my country too, that one day it will see freedom, not just in politics, but in hearts. And I pray for people like me, who live haunted by choices they cannot undo. Because I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about beginning again. Sometimes people ask me why I tell such a painful story. I tell them because silence is what made me a betrayer, and truth is what set me free. My story isn't just about guilt, it's about grace. I speak so others will know that there is no sin too heavy for God to lift, no life too broken for him to rebuild. I want people to understand what I didn't know when I took that envelope all those years ago. That fear is a liar, but love tells the truth. If he could step into my darkness, he can step into anyone's. I am not special. I am just proof that his mercy can reach even the deepest pit. And so when I tell my story now, I don't end it with tragedy. I end it with hope. The same hope that saved a foolish girl who thought $1,000 could buy her life. To anyone listening or reading this now, I want to say something simple. If he could forgive me, he can forgive you. You may think your sin is too big, your shame too deep, your past too dark. but I am standing here as proof that it isn't. I once betrayed love for fear. I once sold my own blood for money. I once mocked the faith I now live for. Yet Jesus still came for me. He found me in a room full of silence and turned it into a place of mercy. That's why I tell my story, not to glorify my pain, but to magnify His grace. My life is a testimony that no one is beyond His reach. You don't have to earn His love. You just have to surrender. That's how I found peace, and that's how you can too. When I look back now, I see two lives, the one before His question and the one after. The first was built on fear, lies, and survival. The second is built on truth, love, and grace. I can't erase what I did, but I can live differently because of what He did for me. Sometimes, when I finish sharing my testimony, people ask me what sentence defines my life. I tell them this: I sold out my parents for $1,000, but Jesus paid for me with His life. That is my story. That is my redemption. And as long as I have breath, I will keep telling it, not to seek sympathy, but to point others to the same mercy that rescued me. Because if the light could reach me in my deepest darkness, then it can reach anyone, even you.